Hello and welcome. I'm Rawia Alami and this is the Dailies, where we take a look at important news stories, reports, analyses and articles published in newspapers and media outlets across the world. The assassination of right-wing activist Charlie Kirk yesterday in the US continued to demand attention from international media. Newspapers continue to cover the aftermath of the assassination, with opinion articles sharply divided over the cause of this tragic event. Another major story grabbed the headlines globally, which was the conviction of former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro and his sentence to 27 years in prison for a coup attempt. Let's start today from Brazil, as all Brazilian press covered the sentencing of former President Jair Bolsonaro to 27 years in prison for attempting a coup. Coverage varied between right-leaning press criticizing the court's decision, while left-wing press saw the conviction as a historical precedent. Brasil de Fato covered the Supreme Federal Court's decision, calling it a defining moment for Brazilian democracy. The report details the 5 charges, ranging from attempted coup to organized crime, and underscores Justice Alexandre de Moraes' position that crimes against democracy are ineligible for clemency. Beyond the legal outcome, also, the piece stresses the symbolic weight of the ruling. Brazil is holding a former president and military leaders accountable for conspiring against the constitutional order. The coverage also portrays the verdict not just as justice served, but also as a historic day that strengthens democratic institutions, signaling that future authoritarian threats will not go unpunished. Gazeta do Povo, the Brazilian right-wing conservative publication, provided an analysis amplifying the dissent and questioning the coup thesis. The piece reflects on Justice Luiz Fo's dissent in Bolsonaro's coup, providing an analysis that leans towards the defense. The piece emphasizes how the defense dismantled the prosecution's case, rejecting claims that Bolsonaro attempted a coup. The report highlights that Bolsonaro's speeches, meetings, and decrees were only acts of preparation and not crimes in execution. While the analysis presents details of the trial, it frames the dissent as authoritative, downplaying the majority's opposition or opposite conclusion. As such, the piece functions both as coverage of the court session and also as an interpretation that echoes Bolsonaro-aligned narratives, questioning the legitimacy of the conviction. American media covered the Bolsonaro's conviction, with the New York Times publishing an opinion article by Professors Philippe Campante and Stephen Levitsky, who hailed Brazil's Supreme Court for doing what U.S. institutions failed to: hold a president accountable for trying to overturn an election. The piece contrasts Bolsonaro's 27-year sentence with Donald Trump's return to the White House, framing Brazil as the democracy that acted decisively. It highlights the unprecedented U.S. response also. Tariffs and sanctions on Brazil, and even Justice Alexandre de Moraes, as Trump sought to shield Bolsonaro and punish Brazil's judiciary. The authors argue Brazil's vigilance stems from its painful authoritarian past, while America's complacency has weakened its democracy. Their conclusion, flawed but firm: Brazil's system proved healthier than the United States. Let's go back to America's main story, the assassination of right-wing activist Charlie Kirk. American press continued to cover the tragedy and its aftermath, with many criticizing the FBI's response so far. Opinion articles were sharply divided, with the right calling it a political assassination and proof of war on conservatives, while the left sees it as a symptom of democratic decay and warns against repressive overreactions. Writing in the Los Angeles Times, columnist Anita Chabria frames Charlie Kirk's assassination not just as a personal tragedy, but as part of a broader crisis of American democracy. She argues also that violence thrives where trust in institutions has eroded, and warns that political murders are less about left versus right than about alienated individuals cloaking rage in ideology. Chabria contrasts this nuance with conservative calls for retribution, cautioning that turning the tragedy into a justification for curbing freedoms would damage democracy further. Her column stresses that while Kirk's death is reprehensible, the response must be to recommit to democratic values rather than to weaponize fear. And the piece is both a lament and a plea for restraint. Meghan McArdle wrote in the Washington Post that tracing America's slide from debating whether it was acceptable to punch white nationalist Richard Spencer in 2017 to the shocking killing of conservative activist Charlie Kirk in 2025. The columnist argued that political violence has become disturbingly normalized, fueled by toxic online culture, partisan panic, and the dehumanization of opponents. Also, while mental illnesses and access to guns play roles, the bigger danger, the author contends, is a society that turns political rivals into monsters. By exaggerating threats and reveling in online fantasies of violence, both left and right risk inspiring unstable individuals. The article highlights the column's plea: stop glorifying violence, stop demonizing opponents, and restore humanity before rhetoric translates into more bloodshed. The Wall Street Journal captures both the grief and the political edge inside the White House after Charlie Kirk's assassination. The report details how President Trump's team quickly hardened security, shifting a 9/11 commemoration to a safer site, heightening police presence at the Yankee Stadium, and opening discussions on longer-term protections. Staffers also mourned Kirk, a close ally whose movement fed Trump's ranks, while Chief of Staff Susie Wiles urged vigilance but not retreat. Also, Trump's Oval Office address cast blame on the radical left and vowed to track those fueling political violence, allying critics so as deflection from his own rhetoric. Allies pressed for a crackdown, even as Trump prepared to honor Kirk with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. British press continued to cover the Mandelson scandal and subsequent sacking. The Times delivers a sharp account of Lord Peter Mandelson's forced exit as Britain's US ambassador after explosive emails exposed his long-standing ties with Jeffrey Epstein. The piece notes Mandelson's refusal to resign, even as he carried on with meetings in Washington, portraying himself as the victim of a media campaign. But pressure mounted. Nearly 50 Labour MPs demanded his dismissal, and Whitehall readied legal options should he resist. The report also notes that Prime Minister Keir Starmer eventually acted decisively, revoking Mandelson's post with immediate effect. The piece underscores both Mandelson's downfall and the political cost to Starmer, whose judgment is now questioned for ever appointing his ally despite long-known controversies. The Independent's editorial delivers a scathing post-mortem on Lord Mandelson's fall, arguing his dismissal as Britain's ambassador to Washington was not only inevitable but essential for national credibility. The piece criticizes Prime Minister Keir Starmer's poor judgment in appointing Mandelson despite long-known controversies and Labour warnings. The article points to damaging emails in which Mandelson called Jeffrey Epstein his best pal and encouraged him to push for early release after his conviction, rejecting Mandelson's later attempts to downplay the exchanges as mere spin. Though Mandelson proved an effective ambassador, his loyalty to Epstein rendered him untenable. The editorial concludes that Mandelson is not a tragic casualty, but the architect of his own downfall, leaving scars not only on his career, but also on Starmer's political judgment. And we'll end with The Economist, which delivers a sharp critique of Israel's September 9th strike on Hamas officials in Doha, branding it a grave miscalculation and calling it a catastrophic error. While Netanyahu vowed after October 7th to pursue Hamas leaders globally, the piece argues that Qatar was a special case, home to Hamas exiles, but also the key US-backed mediator for hostage and ceasefire talks. By bombing a villa there, Israel risks prolonging the war and also empowering Hamas's hardline military wing and derailing already fragile negotiations. The piece stresses that the move undermines America's credibility in the Gulf, shakes confidence in U.S. security guarantees, and strains the Abraham Accords. The report underscores that Netanyahu may gain politically, but the reality carries a warning. Israel has weakened its regional standing while courting wider chaos. That's it for today. Thanks for watching.